impeccable costuming.
Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name's James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello. And this week on the podcast is the indie darling, cinephile, beloved Wong Kar Wai's In the Mood for Love.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, this is like the definitive Mubi movie. You know, I imagine when I open up my Mubi account that should be one of the prominent films there.
Yeah. And it was one of these ones where it's on probably once every 6 weeks at the Prince Charles. And so it's always loomed large in my mind as like, this is a very chic, very cine-literate film that you must see.
Absolutely. If you're a film fan, this is one that you should have seen, I think, is the basic vibe of this film. But the thing is, I have to say though, like Lily, because I've seen it at the Prince Charles, that was my first time seeing it. But trying to watch it outside of the cinema is bloody hard. You know, sorry, it's not hard. It's not hard. That's ridiculous. It's easy if you go with physical media, but streaming it is a no go.
Yeah, you can't stream it, but you can, like, if you're willing to pay good money, you can buy it on a streaming service, no problem.
Well, I found it on subscription. I subscribed, and the quality was god awful. It was a really bad transfer, so I was very disappointed. But anyway.
Yeah. So for me, I did as you did, and my first time watching it was at the Prince Charles a few weeks ago. But then I rewatched it, as I like to do, yesterday in preparation for this. And I have to admit, I just literally Googled In the Mood for Love online and found like a shitty free website where it was playing. And the quality was poor, but it saved me a tenner because I couldn't find it for less than £10, which there's nothing. As an advocate of film, I say that's well worth the price. But seeing as I had already spent 15 quid on seeing it at the cinema recently, you know, I've got a lot of expenses coming my way. I'm about to get married, so this just wasn't the moment to do a double expenditure on this movie. But it's worth every penny, I will say that.
Yeah. So what was your first impression seeing it at the Prince Charles then? Were you upstairs or downstairs, by the way?
You know what? I've never been upstairs. Never sat upstairs in my whole life.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've been a couple of times. It's small. It's not. I prefer downstairs much better. I was just curious. But what were your first impressions then? What was it like, the screening?
Delightful. It was a Sunday afternoon. And I thought, I wish all my Sunday afternoons could be spent at the Prince Charles, followed by dumplings in Chinatown. Like, what better way to spend a weekend?
It's definitely a Sunday movie kind of vibe as well.
Yeah. And it was, you know what? It was like way better than I expected because the title, In the Mood for Love, feels very sexy. Like it's going to be a sexy movie. And it is a sexy movie in a sense. There is this like unfulfilled temptation there. But it's not really. It's more of a kind of a like mournful, like yearning kind of thing.
It's very melancholic. Exactly.
I'd
say it's more sensual or sensory than it is sexy, maybe.
Yes. James, yes. I agree. I completely agree with that. Yeah, so I was pleasantly surprised because without knowing anything about it, it's definitely a surprising film that is very unpredictable. What did you think of it the first time you saw it?
Yeah, because for me, I was doing my bloody usual thing of like everybody told me I should see it and I'd love it, so I didn't see it for 20 years. And so it's only relatively recently that I got over my own bloody self and went to see it and loved it.
Yeah, and you always said to me, you must see this movie, which is also why I said, okay, let's do it this series.
Yeah, I mean, because it's definitely one to watch. But yeah, I was surprised at how small scale the film was. I think this is the problem when a film gets built up a little bit. I think your brain imagines it's going to be a bigger film than it as far as its scale is. But you know, it's a very contained, small film, but it deals with big universal themes. But the thing that got me, Lily, was when we were researching it for this episode. I had no idea the rabbit hole we were going to go down. I mean, your research notes are excellent. I found this documentary that like just went even further down another rabbit hole. It's just lots going on with the production of this film.
Yeah, we will link in the show notes to some of these making of docs because it's completely crazy. And we'll get into it. But just to kind of top line, log line, we're in 1962 British Hong Kong, and we're with two neighbours. They are both married. They live next door to each other, and they discover that their spouses are having an affair together. And so the film follows them as they kind of have this trauma bond where they connect emotionally and spend time together and kind of share in the sadness of the situation without, and don't think that there's going to be a big scene and they're going to break it off with their respective spouses. Absolutely not. So instead you see them dealing with it in a very interesting way by basically reenacting. They try and imagine how their partners got together in this kind of, it made me think of it's like pushing a bruise, it hurts, but you for some reason have this curiosity about about the feeling, and that, because it's like, God, the torture of imagining what attracted them to each other and how it happened. But in so doing, they really do find out how they were attracted to each other because they inevitably kind of fall for each other. But it's not as you might think, how you might anticipate it going. The film goes in lots of interesting ways, and it's not predictable.
Well, yeah, it's like this tentative affair, but the thing that overwhelmingly you get from the film is like the pressure cooker that they're in. Like their rice is in these little cookers, and this affair, this relationship they have is also just in this confined environment. Where there's just no room to maneuver. You feel how hemmed in by like societal conventions of the time that this affair is, and you feel pissed off that their respective partners, it doesn't feel like it's that much of a problem for them.
Yeah. That's one of the most interesting things about the film, is that you never see their prospective partners. They're only in a few shots, each of them, and it's always like the back of their head, or you just hear their voice. And so we don't get any real sense of who they are. We're seeing it kind of from Mr. Chan and Mrs. Chow's perspective, kind of, though it feels a bit more removed than that even, right?
Yeah.
But you kind of you assume the worst. At least I assume the worst of both of them, which is probably grossly unfair, but you kind of think of them as these villainous people off screen, and we never really know.
Yeah, because I was pondering the reasons why that was a decision made, and there's something about a lot of good films do have these elements where there's a mystery that you're never told the answer to. So here it's, what are they like? And you're right, your brain fills in the gap. They're monsters, and you don't get to see them, so it almost adds to their kind of layer of mysterious villainy to some degree. But also, and I was also thinking, I'm not sure if this is, I was trying to figure it out as I was watching it, but I'm wondering if there's a rule, and listeners, have a watch and count, I wasn't keeping absolute count, but is there a rule that we don't see who's in the room until one of our characters, Mrs. Chan and Mr. Chow, until they cross the threshold of the room? Because I noticed there was a scene kind of in the first act or second act with Mrs. Chan talking to Mr. Chow, and we don't see Mr. Chow. He's talking back to her, and we hear his voice, and we know we've seen this character before, but it's only when she's invited in and she crosses into the room that then we cut inside the room. So I don't know if there's something about that we never see into a room until one of the characters goes in there. So that's why they're also kept invisible.
The Nosferatu rule. I like that.
Yes, exactly. You've got to be invited in.
I hadn't noticed that, but that makes sense. There's a lot. It's an amazing film because, like you said, it's a tiny budget. It was made for 3 million, and the world, like you said, is very kind of claustrophobically small. We're basically just in these quite crowded apartments, and the way it's filmed makes that even more emphasized, because as you said, you're never really seeing all of someone's face. You're peering around the back of someone's head to see someone. You're looking through a window into the next room.
Yeah, we're often looking through something.
Yeah, and if we're not in the apartment, the only other locations are quite small offices or alleyways going down to a noodle house. And all of this kind of adds to the sense that it really brings to life the context in which they're in, because like the other kind of it's almost like a B plot, or a kind of what's plugging along underneath is the fact that this is Hong Kong in the 1960s, these are Shanghainese immigrants. So, and everyone in the building is from Shanghai. So they're a community within a community. They don't interact much with like with the local Hong Kongers.
Oh,
And
I
this
didn't pick up on that. Yeah.
well, that I wouldn't have known either, but just from reading about Wong Kar Wai, this was his story. This was his background, that he moved. He's from Shanghai and he moved as a child to Hong Kong. So he basically, there's this interesting other part of the story, which is he's kind of bringing to life his childhood again, because Hong Kong isn't like this. They didn't film in Hong Kong because, of course, it's changed so much since the 60s.
Well, I thought they did at first, didn't they? And then they changed to Bangkok.
Yeah, I think they may have started in Hong Kong, but certainly all of the exterior shots.
Right. Sorry, I think there's a doc that I watched that's filled in a bit of gap in research. This is the thing where the budget is $3 million, but as we'll probably discuss, the length of the production was 15 months. So incredible that they made a low budget. Like, your money must go a lot further there. But from my understanding, they shot the entire film, the whole thing, in Hong Kong. And then they went to Bangkok because I can't remember the reason that motivated them to go to Bangkok, but basically they moved to Bangkok initially just to shoot some studio sequences. I think perhaps maybe there were some studios in Bangkok that were more agreeable to them. But while he was there, he noticed how much more authentic Bangkok looked exterior-wise to 1960s Hong Kong. And so they reshot the entire movie in Bangkok, not just like a few pickups, but the whole thing. And Christopher Doyle, who's the cinematographer who is always talked of as the cinematographer of In the Mood for Love. Well, there's actually a second cinematographer. Christopher Doyle had the classic creative differences with Wong Kar Wai because of essentially he did not want to reshoot his work from scratch. I know that he went off to do his own film. But
He went off to do his own film. So I feel like there are all these things at once. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you can't work on a film for 15 months. It's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. But the point is, in this documentary, there was this side by side of the same shots of Chris Doyle's version of the shot and the same shot lit differently, but the same composition, same movement, same background by a different cinematographer. I had no idea.
Mark Lee Ping Ming.
Thank you, yeah. And I really don't think much of Christopher Doyle's work has ended up in the film. That was quite a revelation that basically they just reshot the whole thing, or the vast majority of it.
Well, and also just, I mean, the crazy thing about this film and the evolution of it is in Wong Kar Wai's style, his like method as a director, which is we don't have a script. There's very little pre-production. Once we've got the idea, we just start filming, and basically through the filming, the story emerges, the scenes emerge.
I mean, this is like the filmmaker dream. This is what we all want. We just want, as long as we want, to just make it up, try stuff out. It's not working. Let's do something else. Let's move to another country. Let's just reshoot it.
It's the filmmaker's dream, but it's the actor and the crew's absolute nightmare. Because especially Maggie Cheung, who plays Mrs. Chan, she really, really struggled with this. She talked about, I mean, it's her fault this film was ever made, because she had dinner with Wong Kar Wai and she'd worked with him before and said at this dinner, I would love to work with you again. I'd love to work with Tony Lee Young, who plays Mr. Chow, because they both were these breakout stars who had starred in this TV series called Police Cadet 84.
And of course would go on to star together in Hero.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Only 2 years later or 3 years later.
I knew they were familiar. God, I didn't put two and two together. Yeah, so brilliant duo and work very well together in this film. And they kind of talk about that in various interviews, how it's sort of, again, sort of echoing the film's storyline itself. They kind of slightly trauma bonded over having to film in this way.
Because Tony Leung was just saying, just go with it. It's fine. Don't worry. Just turn up. It's fine.
Exactly. And for Maggie Cheung, this was hard to do to begin with. She said for the first 9 months, she didn't know what she was doing and felt very...
First 9 months. That's like the length of about 2 film shoots.
Yeah, exactly. She's like, why don't we have a script? Why can't we just do this in 3 months? But she has since said that the film that they ended up having, she got to that character because they did it for 15 months. So she's ultimately grateful for this experience. And I mean, what an amazing, special, rare thing. But it must have been incredibly difficult. Because the thing with the film was that initially Wong Kar Wai's idea was that it was going to be a film basically set in Tiananmen Square, or at least there'd be recurring scenes where this couple re-meet there, called Summer in Beijing. They do some test shots, they make a poster. The Chinese authorities are not happy about this. The censors get involved and basically say, absolutely not. Big surprise. But because they already have the poster, he's like, okay, no problem. I'm just going to change the story. And instead, the film is going to be set in a restaurant called Beijing. And it will be 3 separate stories, 6 separate characters. And the couples are going to play the couple in each of these separate stories in different timelines set in the same place. At some point, he decides, though, that actually he's really into the one story set in the 60s, and he just wants to go with that. So the story is evolving.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to read about that evolution, because that evolution that he went through, that's the kind of evolution that 99% of all filmmakers go through in the scripting stage. You know, he's doing it for real, and you know, in my head, I've always wondered, what would it be like to do that? Because, you know, there's a reason we have a script. It's because it allows you to shoot efficiently. You know, you've got a roadmap, whereas he's doing all his working out by actually making the film. And I mean, I guess the results speak for themselves in a way. This could have ended up like The Room, but it didn't. You know, in this particular director's hands, this kind of improvisational, let's see where it goes, loosey-goosey, you know, in this particular instance, it's made something that has a feeling of poetry. You know, there's a lot of shots in there that don't really make much sense or don't serve any strong story purpose, but they have a mood and they kind of have a poetic, they feed into the atmosphere that's being created, that I think you couldn't quite get that from writing it. I think that is from doing it. I don't know. It's like, to me, it is fascinating because I'm not sure how many other films have been made quite like this.
Yeah, and that's kind of what Wong Kar Wai has said, right? That he hates writing and that the creative process.
We all hate writing Wong Kar Wai, but some of us, we can't. Anyway, grumble.
Oh my God, yes, James, I did think of you because I know you're not. You're much more visual, and I'm more of a writer person. So the idea to me of like just filming and hoping something comes out of it. I mean, I know I completely see the value in it, but it's just like amazing to me that you wouldn't want to have drafted all out, and it's such a contrast to a lot of filmmakers. But I mean, it definitely works for this because there is such a dream-like quality to this. You know, what this comes down to is this is a story about 2 people who share in the profound loneliness of infidelity. Like, that's what comes through to me, is that I imagine when you find out that your husband or wife is cheating on you, there's like this loneliness to that, because not only is this a huge betrayal, but the person who's meant to be your person to like understand you and to be your confidant, and the person that's like your shared person that to go out into the world with and knows you better than anyone, they now are having that with someone else. And so like that feeling is so isolating and lonely and sad. And to then in this film, the fact that Mr. Chan and Mrs. Chan like discover it together and then can bond and share in it together. There's this like beautiful thing of exploring that feeling, but the whole thing does feel like a haze. And so it really works. The way they filmed it and developed it, it works incredibly. But it's just amazing when you look into this production, the fact that there was just so many different scenes, you know, so many different potential endings that they filmed, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's an ending where the 2 characters meet up again, you know, at the end. I mean, which doesn't happen in the film.
Spoiler alert, does not happen at all. And to be honest, it makes sense because when you watch those final parts, they do feel a bit disjointed, you know. I think there's a real, for me, even though it doesn't, some of the scenes are a bit disconnected, the bulk of the movie when they're together and there's this repetitive element to it, you know, constantly.
Yeah, there's a lot of repeated the shots, the compositions, the camera movements even are very repetitive, which to me it's like, as George Lucas says, it's like poetry. It rhymes, you know, but there are these repetitious things that show you that the cycle of life continues and the only thing that changes is their relationship, their feeling for each other in this very kind of structured life that everybody around them has.
Yes, but then I don't know how you feel about it, but I find the sudden change to being in Cambodia at the end and the kind of and the archive footage of of like a state visit from the French president, from Charles de Gaulle, is like slightly confusing. And then I later read, oh, it's because, Mr. Chow is a journalist and he's there on an assignment. And then whilst
Yeah,
he's there,
like
takes the opportunity to go and
would
pay
not have
tribute to Mrs. Chan. It's like, okay, well, we didn't get any of that. I hear the context, but like that's not there, and it feels like we're just in a different world altogether. So once I learned that, there are so many additional bits of footage that were just never used in the film. It's like, okay, this all makes sense now.
Yeah, which again, you can kind of feel that you can feel that everything does have some kind of logic to it. We just don't know it all, which again is very much like poetry, isn't it? You get little glimpses of things or fragments in poetry that kind of as a whole make this feeling, which is what the film's about. So yeah, I had no idea that's why he was an Angkor Wat at the end, but as well, the influence of this film on films that followed it. I mean, the ending, it was clearly borrowed by Sofia Coppola for the ending of her Lost in Translation, I feel.
Which part? The
bit where
when they
he's
say
whispering
goodbye
into
to
the
each
wall.
other.
The bit where he's
Oh, when
whispering
he's
into the wall.
whispering into the wall.
And you don't know what he's saying. And of course, same thing with Bill Murray's character whispering to,
I hadn't even thought about that. Because he's whispering his secret, and we know his secret, which is he loves what's her face. Sorry, what's her face? Mrs. Chan.
that love of my life, what's the face? Thingy.
But no,
thingy,
you're right.
you know?
I'm sure that's and just the whole kind of atmosphere and mood of Lost in Translation, I feel definitely owes a debt.
Yeah.
Is that yeah. I mean, they came out around the same time, didn't they? But yeah, there's that kind of boldness in keeping what you do, so like keeping the story in a sense small, but the feeling so heavy, I think is definitely something that a lot of directors have been influenced by.
Absolutely, because it's the classic case as well. I mean, these are the kind of films that I love, which is, the subject matter is very small and also very simple. It's not complex as far as what's happening, but it's the way it's told, isn't it? It's absolutely the execution here. I mean, there's so many shots and so many sequences that feel memorable. Like there was one that just watching it, which I don't know why it just stuck in my head, where Mr. Chow is at work, I think late at night, and he's smoking a cigarette, and the smoke's curling up from his cigarette into the lights above him, and it just holds on that shot at the back of his head, and it's just beautiful. I mean, again, what's the storytelling purpose of the shot? There's probably some, but it's just more the atmosphere, isn't it? This feeling of loneliness, this lost in a moment where, like, I don't know, everything's transient around him. It definitely invites a bit more of a poetic interpretation of everything.
Yeah, totally. I read someone say that this is a pretty traditional love story, and I really don't think it is. Like, I think, okay, in the broad strokes, an affair and people falling for each other, but like, there's nothing predictable about their relationship, and that's what I really love about it, is that kind of like Juno and what we talked about the twist of that film. You won't think of it as being a film with, a big, crazy twist, but it's completely unpredictable. I feel like, given that we are so in Western cinema, especially now at this stage, there's such a well-worn like narrative path, I feel like this film doesn't give you any of that. There isn't a big act which then drives something else, and then there's the breaking apart and then the coming back together. There is a bit of that, but it's much more meandering, and there's just no like big satisfactory resolve at any point.
Unfortunately, just like life, it doesn't get that satisfactory resolution. And another thing that was fascinating, going back to how it was like the production of this film evolved as it was being made, that in the earliest incarnations it was seen as a comedy, which fascinated me. That the film that we've got is this poetic, melancholic meditation on love and losing a lover. And yet, originally, it was meant to be much more of a goofball, screwball comedy with the two of them. And there's these things we can find online of them dancing together, of them making food. So to see that it didn't just evolve as the story, but the tone of it evolved from a comedy to. I mean, you definitely would not sell In the Mood for Love as a comedy. I don't know if there's even, there's some comedic characters in, but just to know that tonally it evolved, not just the story, but actually the tone that it was going for.
Yes, that adorable video of them dancing together, very Tarantino-esque, very Pulp Fiction, but very playful, and that's really not their dynamic in the film at all.
No.
Like, I really can't imagine Mrs. Chan dancing like that as the character that she is in the final film. Yeah, it's very interesting how it shifts like that. It makes me think of Annie Hall as well, talking about how that film was made on the editor's floor, that what was originally scripted is completely different to the final film. And I love that. I love that film is this like a live art form that isn't frozen on, the script isn't
Oh no.
doesn't necessarily have to be that. I mean, it depends on the film, but in this case it's and then ultimately what a payoff, because it is this like just such a beautiful film and considered, one of the greatest modern classics.
Yeah, it was like his intuition, his kind of feelings that he was following, as he was improvising and he was changing things, essentially worked out correct. And if he'd have scripted a comedy and just shot that, I don't think we'd be talking about that film today. But yeah, I mean, the editing, like you mentioned, it's another part of his process that he gave himself this essentially artificial deadline of finishing the film for Cannes Film Festival. So he had some kind of, I guess, external force forcing him to kind of get the film done. And so apparently he was still adding subtitles the morning of the premiere, and he asked for it to be the last film screened at the festival or that day so that they had as much time as possible. And even the soundtrack, by the way, is gorgeous for this film. The music's lush, but it was in mono because they didn't have time to mix it all. And then after screening it in Cannes, he then re-edited the film. And I have to say, especially the start of the film, there's lots of these fades to black. There's lots of like what you would call little vignettes that fade to black. And that to me felt like, that's because they've removed a lot of stuff, they've restructured things in the edit. And then once you get into the rhythm of the film, that you realise there's going to be lots of these essentially fragmentary scenes that kind of maybe end a bit earlier than you might imagine or cut to something else. But that's the kind of dreamlike nature of the film. But also I think it's because they clearly structure. I heard that as well, because they brought the film down in duration, it just meant that there was a lot, and they missed they kind of simmered everything down, so what you get is just a lot of costume changes for Maggie Cheung's character, which, by the way, impeccable costuming.
Yes, she wears these amazing dresses where the kind of traditional style, but the same exact, each dress is the same style but a different fabric. I was very taken with the idea of having this kind of a uniform, very chic, but actually what it really does is, again, it adds to this kind of dreamlike quality, because so many different looks in every single scene, but she's always impeccable, and it is this kind of, it does almost feel a bit dreamlike the way it's always the same but a different fabric, but very a clever idea. Like, I realized that it was, if they had planned it better, it probably wouldn't have been this way, but it kind of adds something, I think.
Yeah.
I really love it.
And she said she had to do 3 hours for her hair every morning. It was like because the hair is immaculate as well.
Perfectly coiffed in the 60s style.
She also said that the kind of the fabric and the cut of the dress she was wearing was very restrictive, but she wanted it to stay like that because, well, that's what a character would have been dressed like at the time. That would have forced her to move and act in a certain way, so she used that as part of a character, which kind of does give you this feeling of, like, the characters are repressed by the situation, the society we're in, including like how they're dressed, and even that's restricting her and kind of like, compressing her in. There's lots of shots in this film as well where we're seeing characters. I think the first time they share some noodles together in the same room, it's kind of almost like we're inside the wardrobe looking through the clothes at them, so everything's boxed in with them, even the clothes restrict them.
Yeah, exactly. It perfectly echoes her personality and their mode of being in this world, because a big part of it is that even though they are not having a physical affair or even any kind of affair, until it's only fairly near the end that they even like, I think we could even class it as, say, an emotional affair. Right?
Yeah.
They're just sort of supporting each other for most of the film. And yet they're so fearful of what other people might think. They both live in other people's homes in the shared building, and the rumor mill they're so fearful of, that they are very, very controlled about what they do, how they live their lives. And yeah, as you said, it's just completely echoed in the close. It's kind of perfect. I want to talk more about this kind of Hong Kong 60s context because I knew so little about it, but it was really interesting to read that, as we said, they shot lots of additional material, but also at a certain point during the filming, Kar Wai starts filming another film at the same time,
Yes.
which goes on to be a film called 2046. It's released a few years later. And that number is significant because that is the year that it was agreed between the British and the People's Republic of China. That would be the year that Hong Kong would be handed over to China. So
and I had no idea about that.
No, I feel
all I knew was that was
ignorant.
I just knew that was the same number as the door in the apartment or in the hotel. Is it the hotel room? Isn't it in the Mood for Love? I didn't realize there was a bigger significance beyond that. Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, exactly. So in the Mood for Love, the hint that you get about this additional film is that you see the number on the door. But I think if you're from Hong Kong, if you're from China, you would, I'm sure, understand the significance of this because there's this idea that there would be this 50-year grace period where the British economic and administrative systems would still be running before there would be this kind of official handover. But that basically means that Hong Kong is in a state of limbo. And that is very much the sense of this film, right? These characters are in limbo because neither of them feel, at least for most of the film, ready to leave their partners. And their partners have kind of abandoned them. They're in for most of the film, they're away, they're abroad. That they've left their partners stuck in the kind of in the freeze frame that they've put them in. And so I felt like it's just like a beautiful film because even though I knew nothing about that until I read about it afterwards, you get this sense in the film that there's more to it. There's so much of it, especially I think as a Western audience, that watching the film you have to kind of is new and like the idea of as a married woman in your 30s or maybe late 20s, finding a room for you and your husband to live in another person's flat. That's like an idea like in the 60s, that's not something that was happening here in the UK, say. So like even that is like a different thing to encounter and kind of the hints about what's going on. There's talk about Hong Kong being chaos and people moving abroad, moving to other places for better opportunities. There's clearly a lot of like movement going on at this time. And I don't know, it's just fascinating to hear that there is all this context to the film that actually kind of feeds into it. And then at the same time, he was also making this other film that further kind of explores this subject at the same time. I'm just like, I mean, it sounds like Wong Kar Wai was a nightmare to work with as a director. But what an interesting and ambitious and super talented person.
I mean, yeah, he pulled it off. Ultimately, he pulled it off, and he is the ultimate like cool quote unquote director. Every clip you see, he's got his sunglasses on. There's a clip or so where he's asked a question at a press conference. He just lights a cigarette in response, and you're like, Jesus, It's like the definitive cool director.
Yeah. I love it.
Smoking is bad, by the way. Don't do it. It's not cool. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. It looks cool, but no one should do it, and it's terrible.
No. Exactly,
But it's true. It sort of is wish fulfillment, isn't it? It's what you want every director
to
look and be like.
Because you're like, wow, you're so cool and you know what you're doing. Even though you spent 15 months and you kept chopping and changing your ideas, but even that you knew what you were doing. You had some kind of confidence / undeniable skill that in other hands that would have just been the room. That would have just been a disaster, but it wasn't. God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if I say, hey, Lily, I'm working as an actor on this film. The director hasn't got a script. We just turn up and he just makes it up as we go along. You'd be like,
it's just crazy to me that it was such a small budget.
Yeah. He must have had a minimal crew. He must have shot it with a tiny, tiny crew.
Yeah, which I can believe. But it's funny because it looks so beautiful. Shot on 35mm. It looks. Honestly, like I wasn't sure when it was made when I was watching the film. Like it feels
got timeless.
Exactly. It has a timeless quality. Obviously, it's set in the 60s, but it could have been made at any moment, and it has this. Yeah, I think it will. It really will stand the test of time, but it's it's just amazing to me that like that everyone was so willing to keep going with this for so long, because apparently they wrapped 4 times.
I know,
and then Wong just kept up asking Maggie Chung
Can you imagine
to come
that
back.
4th time you've wrapped? You're like, really?
And she was living in
sure?
France with her husband, so it's not like an easy trip to come back and carry on filming in Bangkok. It's just insane. But I'm so glad for it. I mean, it's definitely, like we like to say, it's definitely a vibes film.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah, don't go in thinking there's going to be a lot of action, but if you just kind of succumb to it, I think very definitely try and see it in the cinema if you can, would be my recommendation.
Yeah, it's
the way
beautiful
to watch
film.
it. Yeah, but it will just envelop you and stunning to watch, and ambitious in a way that, yeah, it's a small film, but it's like bold. Like, I read it I heard it described as non-linear. And a way it is, but I think it does. It feels like it has a linear. I don't think that's quite the description, but it does feel like different.
Yeah, because it's got a dreamlike quality, but it's not as non-linear as, for example, the classic non-linear kind of love story thing is Last Year at Marienbad. Now, that's non-linear. That's all over. That's like really pulling you apart. Whereas here, I agree with you. There's more of a logical progression.
Yeah, I saw the film compared to Last Year at Marienbad, and I can really, really see it, actually, because there's that same kind of oppressiveness to the dreamlike quality, the claustrophobia. But the other thing I would say is that what I love about this film is that there's such beauty and glamour to it. It's such a glamorous film, and yet it's without any kind of wealth or luxury, They're living in very normal kind of not wealthy apartments, and, they're spending time, they're meeting each other in these like dingy alleyways, but there's such a sense, there's such a gorgeous glamour to it, and I really like that. I'm like as a fan of Real Housewives, I see a lot of wealth in my media, and it's a real treat to watch something that's beautiful without being kind of like, kind of just wealth, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. The settings and the scenarios really are quite, they're a bit shabby around the edges, especially the interior flat, but everything's been thought through. The production design, just all the details are beautiful. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it work. Even the canister that they carry their rice around with, the colours and there's not one thing that you look at that looks ugly or kind of draws your eye in the wrong way.
No, exactly. And I just like that because, again, it shows a real effort, and that's really what you can do on a smaller budget. And there's beauty in everything. That sounds so silly, but like a bit wanky, but that is. And this film really is a testament to that, the beauty that you can make out of any setting,
Absolutely. And if you are looking for an action version of a film with Tony Leung and Maggie Chung, then Hero's the one for you. But otherwise, this is the poetic meditation on love.
Yeah, there could not be more different. So actually, I think they make a good double bill.
Good
if
pairing,
you need a bit of action after like a slower kind of vibesy film, go for and one that is visually stunning and like there's
also shot by Christopher Doyle.
Oh my God, he's genius. Love it. All right, well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Groovy Movies.
Absolutely, and it always helps your favourite creators and podcasters if you leave them a like or a review.
Absolutely. All right, guys, so we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Groovy Movies is produced and edited by us, Lily Austin and James Brailsford. And James also produced the theme music.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Groovy Movies Pod, or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
For more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes.